So we will get started in a minute. And this is Christina. Christina has been my right-hand woman when it comes to IDDD. She has been my intern, and now she is now an employee, and she has been an asset to me in terms of working in this area and getting this, working with our clients in our in this population. So she will sometimes be doing things for me in this training, and we'll just kind of get started. So what I'm going to do is get my PowerPoint up. And I want to just notice before I do that is to see my little guy here. So I was just getting my stuff together, and like how to get this video chat, video looking, etc. And I saw this little guy, and I thought he just needed to be there, because what I recognize about life and about sometimes when we're working with people who have developmental disabilities, and just the stress and strain that we deal with, is we can sometimes be, our stress can equal being rigid and just kind of like we need to get things done. And I just thought he needed to be here because he's silly. And I recognize in my own life, in my own practice, that having humor and enjoying just like being a little different really kind of helps clients to just laugh, and laughter begins to relax people. So that's why he's around. I just decided he needed to be there. And I encourage sometimes people just to kind of, do things a little different and be silly, because I have a whole explanation about humor, and I'll talk about that at another time. But that's why he's there. And it's not just because I like dogs. So let me get started here. Okay. So as we get started, I just wanted to let you know what we're going to be kind of covering today. When I was actually preparing for this training, I felt like I could write a book. And so I had to really narrow things down here. So my focus is going to really be so that you leave this training with a little bit more understanding of how to embrace those who have disabilities, the developmental disabilities. And when I say the word developmental disabilities, it doesn't mean that they're children. It means that the diagnosis is something that happens when they're a child. And that includes intellectual disabilities and autism. People have been diagnosed with autism, especially like later in their life still, because if they're high functioning, sometimes that happens, but that's still considered developmental disability. So our focus is going to be to learn to just increase understanding and compassion for this population, to understand what the communication struggle is, and to begin to interpret communication behaviors into communication. So we can kind of understand when they're behaving a certain way, maybe that isn't just because they want to be ornery today, but there's really something else going on. And that's real important. Okay. Bullying. Have any of you ever experienced bullying? Now, some of you maybe more than others, but most of us have had some experience of what that means. And it evokes some kind of emotion, whether for you or for somebody you love. Have you ever been bullied? At school? And a child in the neighborhood? A family member? Have you ever been misunderstood and belittled for who you are? Ever experienced a teacher or a parent telling them something about what is happening and be dismissed or misunderstood? So what was your response? Did you fight when those things happened? Did you scream? Did you hide? Did you run away? So what I'm going to ask you to do in terms of getting you involved in this training is I'm going to ask you to tell me which one you are. We're going to use this later in our thing, so just put it in the chat. My Vanna is going to help us later to get have some results of what people normally do. So A, did you fight? B, were you more of a screamer in that situation? Are you more your tendency to hide when people are bullying you, or run away? The reason that was there a feeling of being misunderstood, alone, betrayed, rejected, social anxiety, being socially excluded, lonely? So these things I mention because it helps you to kind of relate to what all of our clients that have in this population face. I'm going to start with this video that, warning, it may cause some tears or may just cause you to have some emotion because it's real for real, a challenge. So this is a video from a person who has passed, who is, and they were nonverbal autistic, my understanding is, but they were the ones that actually put this together, and it's all their words. And so I'm just going to put this in and hope that, the video and YouTube and PowerPoint all work together with Zoom. So, well, let me get this one thing together. So what was that like for you? What kind of feelings did you have? You please share on the chat, or if you want to speak, just to unmute yourself and share, because I think this is significant and it certainly affected me even seeing it again.
It seemed like he was saying that they were lesser people.
And how does that affect you?
Makes you feel bad. The society, we and different ones have maybe not intentionally, but somehow have made them feel this way. And that, I loved it when he said, well, if you try to advocate for yourself, you're considered manipulative. I can't say the word, manipulating. Which we hear that a lot.
I agree. There's which is one of the things we'll be talking about today in terms of understanding people's behaviors, and recognizing that sometimes that's the only way they know how to communicate with us. Anyone else? What do you see, Christina, in the chat?
A lot of people have said that it's sad, that it's angry, it makes them angry, horrible. Someone on the iPhone said it affected me because I didn't know that they were going through these types of things. I didn't realize their cries were unheard like that. Profound helplessness the creator seemed to feel was difficult to witness.
I think the first time I saw this, and just when I first started exploring this several years ago, and even understanding more about not even nonverbal clients, usually just the struggle that recognizing that they actually have the thoughts that I have, and they struggle the way I would, but at the same time, they don't have the voice to say, stop it or whatever. And I think that just grieves my heart that that they've been kind of that it's been stuck there. Our job is to kind of unlock that part, and that's, I guess, the passion that I have. Whenever I even was preparing for this training and just thinking about different things regarding this population, my heart just gets to a point where I just want more for them, and I just want to advocate for the vulnerable, because these are the vulnerable that we take care of. And even this week, I heard of someone telling me if they went to a certain place, that they were concerned that they would be assaulted. And this is like in our region, it's not like somewhere in China or some crazy place, and it wasn't 20 years ago, but just recognizing that some of the places that it's nowhere, it's nothing, none of our CSBs, I'm just telling you, it's just more of just recognizing that it's serious, it's still a serious issue. And I like to begin there because compassion is really the key. So part of our understanding of how to help people is really, I feel like, begins with compassion and understanding ourselves. So the way I can help you the most is if I can understand how to kind of be in your world. And that's sometimes challenges the fact that I got to get stuff done and that sort of thing. So that's where we want to kind of walk in, and that's what we're kind of doing. Hold on one second, because apologies. I did not mean to do that. And so that's kind of recognizing where, your challenges can be. You are right now listening to a training, but at some point you're doing work and you're having to deal with different people, and that sometimes can be a challenge. And how do you deal with your own humanity in that? Where is your struggle? And because honestly, understanding yourself can kind of make a big difference in terms of how you can kind of relate to people. If I recognize I'm impatient in certain settings, then that's something I can work on. And it's not really the client's fault, but that can really kind of help me to do that. It kind of make a difference. Self-awareness can really make a difference in people's lives. So like I just said, compassion and understanding I feel like is the first key. I was recognizing that I don't know everything and I can learn from them. So the first thing, just kind of recognizing too, is just just calling things traumas. When I use the big T and little t, this is from Dr. Karen Harvey that she taught us a little bit earlier this year. And I like this term because it begins with recognizing that some traumas we kind of all know about, like assaults or abuse, those sorts of things that we understand, neglect. But there are a lot of little t's, and that goes along with when we're talking about the bullying that I began with. We all sometimes it's the little things that really kind of accumulate when somebody is misunderstood. We really want to help them to understand what's really going on and how to help in this situation. So there's all kinds of traumas that people can face that look like bullying or being misunderstood. Like in the video, it could be something as simple as not being treated properly or being like treated like they're not there, or they're invisible, or they're not an adult. That's a whole issue that I have been addressing some clients with, because sometimes when just because they have them, they're limited, does not mean that they're a 6-year-old and we should just treat them like, well, let me take care of you like you're a little child, because that's insulting, and they can't really explain. They can't really say, stop it, the way we would if someone treated us like that. Feel free if you have any questions while we're going through these different things. Sometimes you'll hear me repeat things during the training. And part of that is because that's an important stance of how you work with clients who have some of these limitations. Recognizing that sometimes slowing down, and also then using simple language. So I have a decent vocabulary, but it's kind of recognizing that I need to use words that make sense to them. And recognizing that sometimes I'm also from the North, and so I still have my quick voice, and I have to recognize that that is not appropriate, or that's not helpful for people. And so I need to be more intentional about my cadence. It's a small thing that initially may be a challenge to learn, but it's kind of being willing to learn and just being willing to recognize, is my voice too fast? Am I using words or trying to talk about things that are a little bit more, that I'm using words that may not make sense to them? And typically I learn that I'm doing it, if I'm using wrong words, it's just that I look at their face, I'm looking at them. And if they look at me with like I'm engaged, then I might be okay. But if they're looking at them and they're giving that glazed over look, well, then maybe I just need to start over and ask them again. Typically, I learned that people are just open to you're talking to them and learning with you. And if you get it wrong, they're okay with that. They can tell intuitively if they're respected, and that's a way of being respected, to say, do you really understand what I'm saying right now? Or realizing that I'm changing my words and I'm slowing down. Recognize how you're standing as well. If you're with somebody, are you on their eye level? Are you over them? Recognizing, are you open while you're talking, or is it more like get it together or else, that kind of talk, because those things make a difference. I learned this through Dr. Harvey. It was how this picture and this idea was brought up by Howard Gardner. It's from his studies, and just kind of recognizing that, people have there's all kinds of intelligence out there. And so kind of looking at this as a way of how people are smart in different areas. They're not just smart in one particular area. And so typically in our culture is that we're more oriented towards book smart and maybe logical and these other and certain things. But sometimes that limits us. And I remember even as a teenager, I had this observation of people. I had a lot of very smart friends who were like getting 5.0s. We had an honors program, and I wasn't quite that smart. And I recognized, though, I didn't feel bad, because I realized even at a young age, that they had some really good book smarts, but I had some smarts that they needed my help with. So I just learned to enjoy that, or not enjoy it, but embrace that we all have we all have different things that we're good at. And that's kind of where I just always like to speak to with my clients that are actually all my clients, but especially with these developmental disabilities, is kind of recognizing that they are smart, but sometimes it's kind of covered over with these other issues that we're more focused on book smart or going to school, and that sort of thing. So it's really important to kind of see these things and just enjoy what can be, where they're at, and kind of really just celebrating the way they're made and what they're good at. I can see some of them are very good. We have Chrissy and I share a family, and he is like, statistically, he like knows things about football that he retains it. He knows it. I have other clients who are very good artistically. There's they can share things, they notice things. A lot of times they're very good with like just intuitively understanding people and recognizing, like, can I trust you or not trust you? And if you're a good if you're a safe person to be around. And that's kind of where I want to, that's always an important thing to kind of recognize in people. Any questions about this, or is this make? So, and again, it's recognizing people's strengths. So I just encourage, not only for yourself, but the families that go along with your clients, is to recognize, to help them celebrate what they're good at, and maybe even, like, is there something that they enjoy that make them particular? Because that's really how we all begin to learn. And we all have those kind of strengths. We all can maybe have strengths in a certain setting, but we also have other ones that nobody really always has to know about or has the opportunity to share. But especially for our clients with developmental disabilities, sometimes we often can be focused on the ones that don't matter as much. We can focus so much about, like, you need to get it right about the things that are important to us, that we don't focus on what is also celebrating about their lives and who they are. But that's often the way they can be motivated, is when they recognize that they can that they can be taught new things, or that they can, that we will understand them, that we want to understand their behaviors. We want to understand what's going on with them.
Karen, there's a question in the chat.
Sure.
they're asking. Being that some of them cannot communicate well verbally, how do you recognize when you may be pushing too hard? You don't want to treat them like children, but you don't want to push them beyond their means. How do you get a good middle?
Well, that's a great question. It really is. When I think of that question, I think that's what I feel like I'm constantly working on, like when I'm working with an individual, and it's kind of being able to, I first start out with how well do I know that person? And these are some things we'll talk about later in the training. When I know somebody well, then I feel like I can recognize their behaviors, and if they're with me. And if I don't know them well, if I just met them, part of it is learning to build that trust and recognizing that I would go slow in the beginning because I don't know them like that to know. I don't know what their reactions are. And they have to know that when I tell them, if I am pushing them, that it really is like for their benefit. When you think about your own families, when you think of like when you discipline your children, or when you have to give somebody like you need to do this kind of speech, there is a sense that you understand that they need to, they will listen to you better the more that they understand that you're either in charge, or also that they trust you. And the more that somebody trusts you, the more that they're more motivated to say, okay, I want to get this right. Or even when they don't do it right, like as a kid, when you think of children, when they don't do it right, but they still want to please you, even though they're being ornery. There's a part of that they're connected to you through they're attached to you. So I say that that's part of the balance, is kind of like is gauging how much they already know you and trust. And also that just being open, like sometimes we make mistakes. And if I am open to recognizing that I could be harsh at times, that I am impatient at times, that I can be like snappy and I want everything right away. If I understand that about myself, and then I talk to somebody and I was rude, or on the ruder side than I want to be, and being open to them and saying, hey, I did that wrong. I realized I was really rude to you. And ask for forgiveness. Ask, say I want to do better. That goes a long way, because even though they may not be able to even articulate your offense, when you offend them, they may not understand it all. But when you come back and say, I was wrong, I want to do better, and I still need you to do that. Sometimes it is like that. I need you to do this, but I don't want to be mean. I didn't mean to be so impatient with you. And that can make a difference. Is that helpful? Is that kind of like, does that give you some kind of direction? Sometimes for each person, I would say, because everybody is such an individual, for me, it's been getting to know them and figuring out where it is at. And sometimes it takes a minute, which as a counselor, I have a little bit more time on my hands, like I can process it later. But when you're talking about somebody who's in a home, or when you're taking care of them all day, it's a little harder to do that. But it's a little more of a strain to kind of get things done in an appropriate way. So we're just kind of working on that. And but it's a part of like any relationship, and learning to, I think it's really the respect that we give them in that place. Why is my thing not turning? So here's another video we have. What'd you think of that? It's Love on the Spectrum is a TV series that was out of Australia, and they had basically, which is pretty obvious, encourage love and relationships. Oh, not sure what that is. Let me. Hope you're not hearing that, because that's ridiculous. Sorry about that. And it's interesting, though, I was listening to yesterday about a criticism about the show. I mean, autistic adult was explaining how for herself that even though the show, she enjoyed it, she recognized that this was all going through a neurotypical lens. So it was really interesting to get to listen to have somebody's perspective, that it's about how we see dating, how we see love, and how we would encourage relationships, but what makes that right or wrong? It's kind of a good conversation to recognize that the world doesn't have to always look like one way, and we don't necessarily, we're not trying to prove that we don't want those who have disabilities feel like they need to be cured and get better, and then they're going to be just like everybody else, because that's not how they are made, and it's way more complex than not having a tick, and they need to be accepted to where they are. So let me get back onto my video here. So what was that like for you to hear those things? I bring these ones up just because sometimes I feel like a lot of times when it comes to relationships and adult things, I find that it's just way harder. Let me just pass this over. Look at that. It's really harder sometimes for us to understand what to do with adults in these situations. Whereas children are more, I won't say contained, but it's a little different. So what we're really transitioning into is how to have successful communication, to begin to recognize how to communicate, and that might look a little different than when we're talking to somebody else, somebody who doesn't have a disability. So here's my famous, I say famous, it's famous to me. Because I've said it at least more than 100 times. And when I was preparing this, I asked Christina, yes, she said, yes, I even quoted you the other day. So this is it's a point of humor for me, but it really is the truth, I feel. When it comes to communication, it is easier to kick, scream, and throw something than it is to say, I don't like this. I don't like broccoli. It has been my thing I usually say. The reason I say that is because even though autism, and especially high functioning autism, can look very different than some of our moderate or even profound intellectual disabilities, what I have learned is that when people struggle with something that they're feeling, or I need to communicate this to somebody else, especially if there's passion in it, they don't know what to do about the situation, they don't like it. It's almost like even if they're not nonverbal, it's like it's hard to come out of their mouth. It just doesn't come out the way we would want it to. So this is what I've learned over the years, is that it is easier to kick, scream, or throw something than it is to say what they're really feeling. And that's, for me, as a therapist, my focus has really been is to teach them how to calm themselves down, and how to teach them to learn how to say what is really going on, for them to first learn what's really going on inside of them. And that takes time, but that's been my focus, because when they can start to say to their family, to those around them, I don't like this, or this is what's really happening, and their family begins to understand how to kind of perceive that, and how to receive that, their words, then that's where results can come from. Sometimes their behaviors are really symptoms of trauma. We often will talk about like how people can be affected by trauma, and sometimes they get people just like anybody else who has had trauma, and you can always assume trauma when it comes to those who have a disability, especially if they've been in a home of any sort. So when it comes to these behaviors, it's kind of recognizing that sometimes we see them as behaviors, like that's just bad, like it's just wrong. And instead of recognizing that, what's behind that? What's really going on? And sometimes you don't know right away, because if you're just learning about somebody, or if it's something new, you don't know why. But it's always important to kind of take a step back and recognize it, that there could be something else going on, not just, I feel like being ornery today and obstinate. Sometimes we all are obstinate sometimes, but usually something's going beyond there. So here's some things. I just wrote some things that I have learned over the years, some things that seem to help me to kind of be there for people and for them to listen to me. And I kind of I begin with watching your words. Like I said earlier, and I told you I would repeat things, is that it is kind of watching what is your vocabulary? What are your vocabulary words in these things? Recognizing that when you use words that are too large or are that they may not understand, that it makes you kind of above them in a way that is not really helpful for you or them. And they may not understand you, and they may not, and typically they're not going to say, "What are you talking about?" Like a bratty teenager. They're just going to, they may look at you because they feel like almost like they may nod their head and look like they are paying attention, but sometimes that's just because they don't want to be embarrassed. So it's kind of important to kind of recognize that. It's a training of yourself to recognize your words. It just takes a minute, and it did for me too. Watch that you don't use long sentences. Christina can attest, because she was my intern and was with me in a lot of my sessions for like 9 months, that I'm a talker. And so because of that, I have had to learn to not, to kind of watch how long my words are, how long my sentences are. And I think sometimes, women have been at times known to be, I don't know, I don't want to say all women, but there's some women, when they say nagging and they say things like that, which, sometimes this kind of goes along with it. So recognizing that when you use longer words or longer sentences, you kind of lose people. I mean, you could lose somebody even who doesn't have a disability, but recognizing that using long sentences and deep concepts, sometimes it kind of goes over people's heads, or it's like, I get the first little bit and then I can't contain it all. And it's kind of recognizing that I need to use shorter sentences and kind of connect with them more over time, and recognize that they're listening, and then kind of to move forward. Recognizing also that it just takes longer. So if you're teaching somebody new, if it's a new person that you're working with, it's going to take a minute. It's going to take longer than it would if it was somebody who didn't have a disability. And that's the case even when it's somebody who's really smart, like intellectually, but has, which would be more the case like in an autism spectrum, they could be very smart for school, but it still is it's still different when it's like changing behavior and changing and talking about their emotions and communication. It's always a weakness. So it's like, it's going to take a minute for it to come together. It doesn't mean it won't. It just means it's going to take a minute. And it's also harder for them to understand like timing and understand that what's really happening and how that all kind of works together. But it's also for us to understand that sometimes we're like, this is what happened, and we might be even correct. I mean, we might really have the real information, but in some ways it doesn't matter. We want them to connect, to understand. We go into their world. So I'm going to ask, before I go on to explain this slide, I'm going to ask Christina, was there any, so out of the people who responded about the bullying, could you tell me some of the status on those?
Yes, we had 2 that had the fight. We had none say they flight. Or sorry, yeah, we have none for B, and then 2 for flight and none for fight. I got them backwards when I wrote them down. We had a majority of people hide, and then we only had 1 that said they run. And then we did have 1 say that when they hide, they also cry.
That's real. Thanks for sharing. I appreciate it. The reason I asked those questions was to kind of recognize that sometimes if I had saw maybe when you were struggling and that was where you were, if you were running or if that was your response to fight, that maybe I would look at it, would I just look at it like, dang, you're a brat, or you're like this. Or sometimes I'd recognize, wow, what's going on? You're normally like that. Why are you hiding? What's going on? And that's the same kind of thing we want to recognize when we see their behaviors is the same way. And that's kind of recognizing more, people have a reason why they run and why they hide. and why they fight, because they don't know how to say it. So back to the, so tips on communication. So I call these my now people. And I've said this phrase probably almost as much as my kicking one. And I've learned through the process. I started out, my background is working in intensive in-home, and then I became a supervisor in that program. But it's really through working with in-home when I had clients who were like, I'll just say they were oppositional, but they were also odd. And they had that odd, that I recognized that they were more, this is like going back in the olden days, that they maybe have Asperger's. And so because of that, I learned through them, and I learned how, and I had the privilege of helping a lot of them get a proper diagnosis. But I call them my now people because I would think of it as when I first was starting working with them, it's typical counseling things, like where a parent would talk to me about their child, like, Johnny, last week Johnny did this. And Johnny would look at me like, and his mother like, that was so last week. Why are you bringing that up? And so that's part of my, what I've learned is that they're present focused people. So it's not that they don't remember. It's not like it doesn't, like they're like, I have no memories past, today or of the past. It's just that they are in the present moment. And they really don't know how to figure out like, oh, let's reflect on that very well. So it's really important. That's why when I do therapy, for me, is working in the present time. And I'm teaching parents like how to, or their family members on how to help them, when they are struggling. I do this because I'm with them 1 hour at the most a week, maybe 2 if I had a family session and an individual. That's not very often, but even still 2 hours out of how many hours are in a week, and that their parents or their family have interaction with them. So it's important for me to teach the tools, because the tools are important. So I just say, because they're going to go on with their life that way. And so I encourage them to recognize that they're in the moment. So it's kind of like, if you're dealing with something, it needs to be right then. And it's kind of recognizing that that's the way they are. So like, bringing up that, for the last 3 weeks, you've done this is not very helpful. It's not the way they usually think. So I would just encourage you to like recognize like if you're communicating, is that how often you're doing that, and how often and how much you can kind of like focus on now. And you can know that all the other stuff, but recognizing that we want to keep working. They're more focused and more willing to do things in the present and what's going on right now with them. And, I don't mean the last 24 hours. I just mean like, but more recently versus the old stuff. Now, if they've had trauma, it's not that they won't remember that and talk about that, but it's almost like that's a different issue. That's not about that they can remember those things and process those things. That's like a different issue than really the behavior they're doing. So the next thing is I say is quick phrases. So this is kind of things I've learned, again, going back to what I shared in the last slide about being a babbling brook and kind of trying to avoid that, is they respond the best with short phrases. So if you can learn something like, I can do this, I can do it, or saying like, let's get ready to go to the doctor. Let's get ready. It's important to use the same phrase over and over again. The reason I say this is because I just know people, and I would say this, I've heard it, I experienced it, where, we could be like, oh, how do I say it like this? Well, like, Johnny, we need to go. So go put your shoes on because we need to go. Okay. Then a few minutes later, because Johnny's not moving, he ain't doing nothing, he's enjoying whatever he's doing. And then next time it's like, Johnny, we don't want to be late for you to go to the dentist. And then there's blah, 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 more sharing. And Johnny's like, doing his own thing. And then, so often we can say a lot of things and we're trying to say the same thing basically, but we're being creative. We think if we say it a different way, we'll give the right, and it will happen. But that's not really what happens. Usually it's like, wah, 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 wah. We don't really listen. The person doesn't really listen. And I think this is probably the case for a lot of people, the But what I've learned is that if you learn, especially with those who have these developmental disabilities, if you have a quick words of things you're going to say, then it's just easier to do it. It's just they begin to learn because the ears are hearing the same things over and over again. And that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to get them comfortable with hearing the same words. So and as somebody learning that, it's just, you have to kind of, what am I trying to say to them? Go brush your teeth. Okay, then let's just keep saying that. And for us, it can sound like, oh my goodness, I'm just being such a nag. But in some ways, but in their brains is hearing the same thing. And you can have them repeat it to you. What do I need you to do? I need to go brush my teeth. What do I need to do? What do I need you to do? I need you to brush your teeth. Okay, so they're hearing it, they're saying it, and that helps them. But that helps them to focus better. The other thing I call, again, I'm quite unsophisticated because I think it's effective, is I call my finger recall. And especially those who have any executive functioning issues, and a lot of these, there's a challenge for that, is that use your fingers. So it's like, what do you need to do to get ready for bed? It's 3 things. You brush your teeth, you put your jammies on, and you take your meds or whatever. If you get them used to this and you're doing the fingers, how do I do it? It's 4 things. And if you make it that there's no more than 5, then it's easier. What do you do in the morning? What are the 5 things you need to do to get in the morning? I brush my teeth. Well, I brush my teeth, I get dressed, I eat breakfast, take my meds, and put my shoes on. That's what I got to do. If it's simple like that and you can repeat it back with them, you can have a little poster, you can write it down so people don't, because it's not something we would remember easily unless we really would remember. But it's important. But that repetitiveness and having them use their hands, I think it helps. It keeps them focused. It also keeps us to not have to use a paragraph and saying an essay when we're trying to direct people. It's just what's the bedtime routine? What's the hands for the bedtime routine? And they can just put up their hands and say, these are the 5 things or whatever it is. It doesn't have to be 5, it can be whatever is helpful. That can be effective. Any questions on any of these tips that I'm giving or my little things I'm saying? Okay. What I have learned in terms of these are more tools oriented, and recognizing that teaching clients, again, that to say what their feelings are, it just takes time, but it can be worked out. It doesn't always happen right away. And I think it goes back to that trust. And I have used tools. So as a counselor, it's a little different, but at the same time, these are the things that have helped. Videos, books. I often have used books, pictures, music, role playing, using stuffed animals. I'm not a big puppet person. I really am not, but I do have noticed how, but I like stuffed animals, and that seems to be effective. They always like when I bring one, and we can talk that way. Yeah, I have some teenagers that would insult them, but for some, that's actually kind of fun, and they can bring theirs as well. So those are just things that I've used. I have noticed, and this just happened literally in the last month. Christine and I, again, share another client that has, who's autistic. And I would say, and he is really perseverates over certain things that are, and I've learned that his perseveration is because he's anxious. And so there was just this one time that I just went on YouTube and played calm music. It wasn't anything, like this special music, but I put it on, and it was almost like immediately that he calmed. He stopped perseverating over this other thing, the thing that he likes to perseverate over that isn't a great conversation. And I was able to talk to him about his anxiety and other things that were important. It was almost like that mask went away. So I would just encourage you, if you've never used calming music in your interactions with clients and in your homes, I would just suggest that to see what happens. They won't all work the same way, but it can work because, excuse me, sometimes what we're not talking about today is that we're mostly just talking about communication, but there is a lot of neurological pieces that are beautiful and how our brains connect to music and they bring that calm. It's not just, oh, that's my favorite song. It can actually do other things that we don't understand. And sometimes those who have these disabilities actually have more of an attunement in these areas. So also I encourage them, if they like their favorite song or music, it's important for them. It's good for them to get a little dancing. And Christina can attest, I have, danced with my clients and got them going when they were all like, distracted or they didn't really want to do anything. And I've even been told that that's not my favorite song, so we don't want to play that one anymore. But at the same time, getting them moving their arms and doing those things are things that get their brain flowing and actually make them smile, and that way. And just sometimes they need the need for rest. So like if we have busy clients, and sometimes I just say that as rest in this situation isn't just generally we all could use some rest. It's also about the fact that it is just very easy when people are like getting upset and frustrated that we just go, what's going on? What's going on? What's bothering you? What's bothering you? And that can make them scream louder. Like that can make them get like, can you just give me some space? And we all need space, but sometimes when we want to resolve the problem, we don't like, they're upset. We don't want them to be upset. But sometimes what I have experienced, and I'm sure you have too, that sometimes having a minute, even just 5 minutes, of just saying, well, why don't you just go and have you just be, and like everybody leave that person alone. It can bring that calmness of just learning to intercalm them. That they're actually learning to self-soothe and just like they sometimes just need a break. And that can be helpful to just, then they can talk about whatever's going on. So this is something that this is just a pondering moment. And I would just ask you what you think about this. So notice and watch when you're communicating. Does your communication command an answer? Like, I need you to get this done. And authority versus inviting a person to share. Now, there are some things that just need to get done. And I get it. And of course, when it comes to safety issues, and there's certain things that are a concern. But often our tone and how we command, like, why are you doing this? What is going on here? It can be, why would you do this? That can be things that can make a command that makes people shut down versus saying, hey, what's going on here? Your voice and your tone can make a difference. So what does that sound like to you? What do you think about that? Is that something that makes sense? Or is that kind of, like almost too soft? Anybody? Christina, what have you learned about this?
I've learned that I do need to make sure when I'm talking to people that I'm not commanding an answer instead of just giving them the option to answer. Shannon did say that this does make sense.
I think sometimes when we have younger folk, like I'll say that with children, but sometimes we treat people, it doesn't matter how old they are, especially if it's an intellectual disability, we can treat them like they're little kids. And we don't necessarily say that to ourselves, but we can kind of give them like, get in line, bucko kind of thing. And sometimes there needs to be a little bit more of a sense of respect. I feel like inviting equals respect. I'm letting you in. It's not like, do what I ask you to do and knock it off. There's a time for that, but that's probably less as an adult with my, with adult clients than it is with a child where you're telling them certain things. But that's what I have learned over, they are more willing to learn and they're probably open to it more.
Ebony said, when you make it light and conversational, it can help de-escalate a situation.
people hear your tone, and even you could be saying the same thing, but because they feel like you care and that you're not like move it quickly, then it helps. And I would say most of the people that I've worked with a few exceptions, they mostly don't move quick. I'll just say that. I mean, I would just say, even with when we're talking about autism or more intellectual disability, I have some that are more jumpy, but when it comes to like wanting to do things, it takes them a minute for their brain to kind of catch on that we need to do this. That's again why I do the repeating of the phrases at times, because it's going to take, it takes them a minute to really, for their mind, you know, what they're hearing to actually catch up with what, oh, I need to do something, that kind of thing. Again, here I go with my trust, which has been something I've been saying throughout the training, is kind of recognizing that when people trust you, they really are able to open up a little, they're able to do things for you, and it takes time. But also at the same time, watch when people are too trusting, like they just met you and they're like one big hug, and they, you know, they don't even know your name. And that's also, you know, that can often be an issue of from their trauma or other experience. Some people are just more like that, and we just have to teach them better, you know, how to have good boundaries. But sometimes it isn't, you know, they just really want your approval and friendship. And so recognize that sometimes they can be that way, and you're like, oh, wow, I must be doing a good job. And you might, and it may just be that they're, you know, more open. But at the same time, we want to protect them and recognize that that's often sometimes superficial. And they want just to always look like you're okay, you know, that you're like that. They want you to be liking them. Or they may be resistance because they don't trust people. Recognize that resistance may look like aggression or defiance. So again, that I might resist you, and why is that? But I might, you know, I might look away from you or choose not to do what you, like I might just not do it and not say anything. But some other people, but you know, but others are aggressive, or they may look badly. They may look like they're defiant, but there may be something else going on underneath that. And you know, this is the hardest one, to resist taking it personally. It's just not. It's not about you. But sometimes, because you're human, it feels like it is about you, and you can take it personally, and that can affect the way you know, really interact with people. And so that's why it's important to have others that you trust, that staff that you can kind of process some of this with, because we all have a need to kind of vent or kind of process when things aren't going right, and to kind of help us to get back into the middle and kind of be like, yeah, I'm gonna trust this. I'm gonna be okay. I'm not gonna. I calm myself back down, etc. You are your best tool, and that when you recognize that sometimes we do take it personally. I would be lying if I said I haven't at times taken things personally, and I've had to like step back and say, this is there's something else going on, and I don't need them to approve of me. I don't need them to always think I'm wonderful. I need to be there for them and be present and help them through whatever is the case. So, and that, again, you've heard me say the word respect a few times here. It's important to just ask questions. I think when people trust you, there's an opportunity to ask. I can remember one time learning about one of my clients who, you know, again, you think, especially if they have an intellectual disability, that they haven't done a whole lot and haven't gone a lot of places. And I learned like that because of their family members, that they actually traveled all the places I would like to go see and places like I'd like to go. And I thought, you know, you can easily like assume that they, you know, this has been their life. They just live this very small life, or with how you see them now. But in reality, everybody has, you know, you just never know. Every family is different. Every situation is different. So asking them questions and tells them that you care, that you are curious about them, that you would like to know things. I also say that sometimes respecting them is understanding that sometimes new activities are hard. Again, we will talk about this in the incoming slides, but new activities are a challenge. It's a new thing and it might be scary to try, but that doesn't mean they can't do it or that at some point they won't. But it's kind of recognizing that as much as you think of if you had to do a new thing, anything new for any of us is like a challenge. But for someone who has where predictability is like a prize, then a new activity is like, I need to introduce it over and over again and give them some space to like kind of get used to the idea. That's part of respecting them, is kind of giving them some time. Stress. I know all of you relate to this because all of you have experienced stress in your life. And I would just say that for those who have a developmental disability, they're highly vulnerable to stress. And when I say that, what I mean is that maybe if it took you, this many things to feel like, whoa, this is too much, it takes them a lot less to get stressed out. Anything that is new is a challenge. Any kind of loss, is a challenge. So, the unpredictable things that they go through. I think of this past, year and a half when it first happened, when we were first at home, and when everything was kind of shut down. I just remember like pondering with my clients. I mostly was talking to them on the phone. But I remember just having to ponder like how, if you have an intellectual disability, how like this doesn't even compute in your brain, because when I'm sick, I stay home. I don't stay at home when you're sick. I stay home when I'm sick. So that was just, that's just one little thing, but that's like something that people have to understand. It can cause stress. It was hard for us. There was an adjustment for everybody in the world, but at the same time, because that's harder for them to understand and their predictability is changed, that really affects how they see things. Now, it may be different now because it's been, more than just a month, but at the same time, it's recognizing that they are vulnerable to stress, that it is more difficult for them to kind of rise to the occasion of having a different stress factor. Warning, I'm rigid. I smile because I remember like that when I was writing this up for this training, I just giggled because there's a statement that is true. If we come in recognizing, I always like to say when I would talk to parents, like when we were kids, we were taught to be flexible. Actually it came very naturally. You could be doing something and your mom would just say to you, we're leaving in 5 minutes to go to the store, get your shoes on. And it didn't matter, and you might fuss, but you just kind of knew, and you kind of just did it because you didn't have a choice. But in children and generally have that flexibility. But when it comes to those who have a developmental disability, regardless of their age, there is a challenge to be flexible. And so it's kind of recognizing that this is how they are, that it's difficult to make decisions. When you think of how people say, think outside the box. Well, that doesn't even, that's scary to them. That doesn't even happen in their world until, they can learn new things, but it's harder. It's just not natural for them to think outside the box. So they're way more into black and white thinking, and that there's a right way and there's a wrong way. And so sometimes their stress can be just that you did a different way and you're like thinking it's not a big deal, because in the end, it probably isn't a big deal, but because of their routine and what is right to them and what is not okay for them is what is being affected. And I would say this is the case, autism is typically known more for their rigidity, but I would say both, anyone with an anyone who has a disability, developmental disability struggles with this. it's really also hard to understand more abstract concepts. That's why even like I mentioned earlier about, or just a minute ago about, us being quarantined because of COVID, that's challenging. I mean, it was hard for me to, well, we're really doing this. So I was thinking when it first happened, but for them, that's very abstract. When I'm not sick, it's so confusing to understand something that's, like not happening. So it's kind of recognizing, how do we bring that to them? How do we make it concrete? How do we make, using visual aids, using things that they can understand. It may take a few more minutes for us to get that together, but it can be very helpful. And it's also difficulty generalizing a concept. So when I say generalizing a concept, what I mean is that if you told, like, I'll just say this as a social cue. If I did something inappropriate and I chewed with my mouth open, or I was doing, my manners weren't very good, which I'm sure as a kid that happened, and then somebody gave me a look like, I don't know about Karen. Intuitively, my brain says, oh, I shouldn't do that anymore. Whatever it was, if I was, whatever it is, you just kind of start learning, oh, that's not a good thing. Or if somebody corrects me on something, I learn, oh, and I can generalize that. So like, if you said it to me, I say, don't do this or whatever, I can learn that maybe I shouldn't, really that should be generalized, that I wouldn't want to do that for anybody. But often people who have a developmental disability have trouble generalizing it. They have trouble taking it like, okay, this person doesn't like when this happens, or this concept also applies to somebody else. So you might teach somebody or say, don't do this in this situation, but they might not carry it over to another situation that's similar. And you're thinking, yeah, I told you not to do that. But they're not getting that you're also talking about this situation over here. So it's also important to understand that part, that sometimes they are learning things, but they learn them in very specific terms. Has anyone ever had that experience where someone, like, you thought they got it, but they couldn't generalize it? This is like oh, good. See some. I've also learned something else, which is like, it's a different way of thinking. There's actually a term for it, but I've noticed this more with people on the spectrum than people, but at the same time, I think it's just a good thing to keep in mind, is that sometimes there's an aspect of the way people think. They have, especially with autism, I would call it that it's hard for them to go from general from like a big idea to a small one. And what I mean by this is, like, here's an example. I had a client who said, his parents thought he was aloof and different things. And they would just say, like, hey, we're going to go out to eat tonight. Where do you want to go? And he would say, I don't care, wherever you want to go. And they just thought that he was just so laid back and that he didn't care. And they just were concerned, like, doesn't he have an opinion about anything? But in reality, when I talk with him, is that it's kind of like he had a hard time taking that general statement and saying, well, where are we going? To like having a specific idea. Like, if you said to me, we're going out to dinner, where you want to go, I could think of like 3 or 4 places that I'm thinking I wouldn't mind going to. But sometimes that does not work that way in their minds. And so what I had heard, this young man, he did not have autism. He had some autistic tendencies, I would say. And so because of that, but I was able to work with him to say, when you feel like your mind is like, I have all these questions, then ask a question. So what I did, I asked him, so when someone would say, where do you want to go? Where do you want to go to dinner? You say, what are you thinking of? Or ask a question of like, think of like, well, do you want Italian? Do you want Chinese. And that's what I encourage his mom to do, is ask much more specific questions. Like, so, and I've said that to, staff, when you have somebody saying, well, what was your day like? And they look at you like, they don't really know. They may say good because they're polite, but if you ask them a question and they give you that kind of blank stare, it may be that your question is too general. It's kind of like with my young man. I said, if I ask, because we did some role playing, and I asked a question like, what are you doing this summer? And he would say, and his questions would be, well, what do you mean? Like for work, for vacation, for like, am I going to summer school? Are we moving this summer? Because that was a possibility for his family. And so, for us, when you ask that question, I think most people are like, well, whatever one you want to answer, but that's not how they think. And so that's important to ask, to kind of keep it in your back of your mind, that when you have a client or a family member who says things, who kind of gives you that look like, and your question is pretty general, is to kind of ask more specifics. Be more specific. Are you gonna go on any trips? Do you like to go to the beach? Are you gonna see your family at all? That's kind of, because then they can say yes or no, and that might get them conversing of like, oh, I'm hoping to go get ice cream in this summer because I really like ice cream, that kind of thing. But that's that's a different concept, but that's also very important to kind of be aware of when people give you that look. Like, I don't know how to answer it. It could be that their mind is flooded with a lot of ideas and they just can't say it quick enough. Hey, I need this, or hey, which one do you want me to answer? How do I answer this correctly? Oh, I don't know what happened. Excuse me. So just like I've been mentioning all along, trying new things is a challenge. So just kind of being ready to recognize it is going to take a minute. When I did in home, or when I have worked with families, it would be really to recognize that transition should happen over time. So for instance, like when it was a school change, it was that we went to visit the school. If it was that, they would get to walk around, even know where the school is located, or if it was a new doctor, that they would get to see things and do things, that they would be able to have a concept of it before it happened. Whereas for us, for most people, that's not an issue. That they may have some anxiety about it, but they don't really, it's not a big deal. But for those who have a developmental disability, being informed ahead of time can be very helpful, even in a little bit. Sometimes a picture can make a difference. It can be really however you feel like it would be helpful. It's kind of us thinking outside our box to kind of see how can we make it something like the new thing. How do we help them to transition? How do we expose them to it over time? Now, sometimes you can't help that. Things have to change because they change, but we can kind of help them along the way to, and recognize it's just a challenge, that new things are hard. We'll perseverate. Will is the word. So perseverate is one of my big words for the training. So when I say the word perseverate, a lot of times people will use the word obsess. Often clients, especially on the autism spectrum, will have, every one of my autism clients has an obsession, has something that they perseverate over. Some are pretty like normal things, like things that are very helpful and are a big deal, and some are more challenging. I'll just say it that way, challenging. So recognizing that they are, but also recognizing why did they bring them up. So they may perseverate over they like football, which is not a big deal. And that's also, people enjoy it. It's football season, so it's not a big deal to talk about it, which is very different than if they perseverate over the police and police, how to act with the police come and want to point a gun at you. That's a very different perseveration. And so sometimes it's recognizing what is the reason for the perseveration. If they're really obsessed about something, it's something that's new. Recognizing that, what people have said is that they contemplate that Einstein was on the autism spectrum. Some of you might have heard that already, but I like to say it because you think about a good scientist, they need to perseverate. They need to where it's that's on their mind, and they don't care about a whole lot of other things. Oh, excuse me. That's really important to them. And that's not a big deal. That's actually amazing. That's amazing. A lot of the things that we have, are people just focus on things for, intensely. So I say that to kind of balance it. It isn't like perseveration is always like a bad thing that you just, trying to stop. It is a challenge at times because people still need to do, they need to think about other things. Things got to get done. But it's also kind of being respectful of and helping them to understand there's a time to talk about it and there's a time to say, it's time to kind of put it away, or to say it's, there's a different time. Often it's challenging because as a neurotypical person, if I was having a conversation with them, and I would say, oh, I know this about your topic. They don't really care about my topic, but I know they don't really care. They just have to get it out, have to say it. And so sometimes it can be, it can vary, and it all varies between person to person. But at the same time, just be aware. And, sometimes it changes. And it typically does. But it's about recognizing that's when are they perseverating and not seeing villainizing that, but also just helping them along and putting boundaries around that. And the statement that I could probably say for lots of people, but they thrive in predictability and struggle with change. So sometimes I'll say this, an issue of respect is recognizing that I can tell them stuff. If I can tell them we're going to go do these things, or these are the changes that are happening, that's respecting them that we're going to help them along that way. Predictable means that I do better if I know what's going to happen today. Predictable can mean even when I used to do in-home, and I would if I had to go in the store for something, I would tell my clients, we're going to go in the store for these things. That was helpful, even though that sounds like a very minor thing. It actually helped them to predict, we're going to do these stores, and we're going to do these things today. I gave them some kind of responsibility by them knowing about that. And that helped them, as opposed to when I was a kid, I just went with my mom. I didn't I didn't care either, it was okay. But it helps them to be predictable, we're going to go to these places in the store, as opposed to just doing their own thing. And then recognizing that it is an issue, just change is a challenge. It's it needs to happen in a process. It is the best way, but change is always a challenge. And but if I understand that, I can help them better to be and be empathetic that it's a change. Some changes are things that we do that they have in their own lives, but sometimes it's changes that most of the changes happen. They don't have they don't have a choice in, and it's a matter of just kind of helping them along.
Karen, two people have made comments. Shannon said, I had a similar situation today. With my ID client, I was processing ways to release emotional pain. I said, what outlets do you have? The client stated, my outlet is next to my dresser. And then Crystal said, I never get this word right. Go ahead, say it. Preservation. Specific passiveness has been what I have seen with individuals on the spectrum too.
That's a very good point. Yes, they often are their events. And that's why sometimes, it's they need to share it. But I also find that as we engage them, that's usually how they learn to kind of let go of it. And we recognize and that's for other trainings, but kind of recognizing how would we interact that way to kind of help them along. Let's see. So here's some other things I have learned. So being consistent and clear. I know that life at times just doesn't go the way we want, and that's part of life. But as much as we can be in being consistent. I was actually listening to a video yesterday of a lady who is autistic, and she has 2 autistic children. And they literally were talking about how they literally, if it's Tuesday, they eat this meal. On Wednesdays, Wednesdays, they have a different meal. It's like almost like their routines are clear. Now, that was kind of surprising to me because I just could not imagine, like, that's not how I've lived my life. But if consistency helps, then why not be predictable? So sometimes it is easy to do that, and sometimes it's not. But when you have a routine, the more they have their routine, it is helpful. It is helpful for them to see their routine. So even if they can't speak, I mean, if they don't read real well, if they can see, like, even with pictures, it can be helpful to know what they're doing next. It helps clients to see you in the same setting when possible. So, I mean, this is obviously, we're doing this Zoom wise, but I'm just mostly saying that, they can see you in that place. It can be helpful. You can create a routine that includes some fun. And that's why I say the charts in that way. I like to just say that, anytime you can include like how you're feeling, sometimes it's easier to say things, like point to a picture, than it is to say things. It's also important sometimes to say, like, like if you're really trying to say, like, give rewards, like, for instance, if you really have done, if they're doing a good job, is to have a reward chart. I don't care how old they are. I reward myself, and I will reward myself after this training's over for being, because when things go well, it's okay to do that. I think we all do that. Let's not lie about it. We all do good things for ourselves when we, have something to celebrate. And so I think that that's okay to do that regardless of what the needs are or where they're struggling. And it's okay to have pictures of it. Like, almost like, if you do these things, then, we can make a reward, and we're all motivated that way. And that's just the way we are as human beings. So I just encourage, to be creative that way. And so, like, recognizing, like my last one says, use a simple reward if they complete a task without being distracted. I tell my clients, even just a little thing, sometimes the families, I tell them, like, if it's a small thing, like, you could say, if they do their task, but as long as they can have, if they could have candy, just to have a few M&Ms. I'm not saying like they get to have a basket of candy, but if they can have one little thing at the end, they can count it as a reward. We're motivated. If they're motivated because they get to have, some time outside, or they get to go, they like to watch their favorite show. It doesn't, it can be, you will know what the person likes. And, say then, hey, you get to do this a little longer, and because you did a good job, people understand that, and they're motivated by that encouragement. And I just think that sometimes, also recognizing that things cost things, like that, it sounds like, sometimes because everybody with a developmental disability can kind of, the focus can often be on what, like my behaviors, and like, I'm upset right now, and they don't often see the cost of it. So sometimes it can be also helping, like, if I have upset somebody else, how do I do, maybe give them a cost, or help them to recognize that sometimes their behaviors have consequences that way. But that's also more about an advanced thought of how do you help someone to do that. And I wouldn't do that with everybody right away, but it's more like, but I think it's important for people to understand that, like, if I break my glasses, my mom will have to pay a lot for that change. And sometimes recognizing that there should be a cost to that I just don't get to have that. Oh, when I act like a fool, if I get upset, I need to keep it contained because I don't want to break everything and then have to deal with that. So that's more of but if they know that's consistent and that's written up, that helps them. But sometimes that's not right away what I would be talking about, but I would talk about that at some point. So is this what you're doing, and how are you challenged by this? Where do you feel like you need to change? Because we all know, just like we know for our clients, that if you have, you might have learned a bunch of things here that were nice, but the best thing that's going to happen is if you come away with one or two things that you could do differently, and that you feel like, I want to work on this a little bit more. I want to be a little more patient, or I recognize that I need to be more, put more structure into a day, or be more predictable for them, so they know what they're going to do today. I just encourage you to kind of recognize what you need to do that would help you grow in what your role is with people with disabilities. Relax and enjoy. I just think that's why, again, with my little person, why I started with my little dog that was going to look at me. I just realized, life is hard, and these people who have disabilities, it's harder for them. They have limitations, and sometimes we can so focus on their performance instead of the person that's there. And I would just say it's been a privilege, the clients that I've had and I've gotten to know. It's been a joy. It's been stretching at times, but it's recognizing that they're each individual. I was just listening to something yesterday and it was like kind of funny. And I just had to say, yeah, they're all different. They're all different. I've had more autistic probably than intellectual disabilities just because that's where I started. But guess what? They're all different. Everybody I've had is all different. They may have some similarities just because we all do have some similarities. But sometimes I get caught up in the, like the mass of people who are like, have this disability. And well, everybody is different because that's how we're made. We're made different. And they all come with different things. And the more we can celebrate them and enjoy them and recognize when I'm not enjoying them, then I need to take a little break. Because that's really where they get their best. They get the best of us, and we enjoy them more that way. So here's some other time-honored tips that I've learned through the years. So when I talk about, and I don't say this in any disrespect, as I've mentioned, just respect so much, recognize that the developmental level of the child. So I have said this to my staff when they've asked me this question, if they are like, without disrespect, what either emotionally or intellectually, how old do you think the way they're interacting with you is? So when I say that, it's not to disrespect anybody. It's really to recognize that developmentally they may be at that place. And if I have a person who's 45, but I treat them like they're a 45-year-old when they're really developmentally more like a 7-year-old, I'm really kind of doing them a disservice and demanding and expecting things out of them that they're not ready for. So it's kind of like a little tricksy thing. I say that because I, respectfully treat them like adults when they're old, when they are adults. But at the same time, I'm aware that emotionally I'm going to expect more of a whatever child, like of a 6-year-old, for instance. So that helps me to recognize how I need to kind of be kind to them, how I need to like take things slower, or how I need to do that. I have books that I use. They're children's books. And I remember a couple of years ago, I laughed because I realized that one of my clients who has an intellectual disability, that I showed her this book about this, it was an anger book about how this, he was called the soda pop kid, and how his head just, popped up, his cork just popped off whenever he was angry. And she just loved it. She just loved it. And it didn't matter that it was really for a younger child. And she just enjoyed it, and life went on. And I giggled to myself because I thought I had a 12-year-old at the same time, and she would have been so seriously offended if I had brought that book in for her. So what I just want to say is that some of the issues that we would normally think of with children, or would think of people who are adults that they would be offended by, aren't usually an issue the same way. So sometimes it's just kind of recognizing that that what I can expect is more they're emotionally going to be at this age, but at the same time, I'm respecting them in their changes, who they are. I recognize that it takes time for them to learn a concept. Again, I've said this several times. So I just continue to repeat the same things over with them. And if I do it in the same routine or do certain activities that help them to get going, it's good. Also just helping them to enjoy time. And that's why, again, with music or activities that make them smile, that can kind of help them to feel like loosened up to talk about things that are more serious. It's just like for all of us, when we feel comfortable with people, when we feel like I have had these good times with you and you have been great with me, that's when I share more about who I am, or if I'm struggling with something. When you develop a deeper friendship, that's how you do it. You don't just, and so that's the same way for them. So I'm at my end of what I have to share, and I hope this has been helpful. But I wonder if you have any questions. This has been my presentation, but you might have something that you either want to comment or you feel like is like right there for you. So is there anything that any questions that you have?
I'm interested in what you see the impact of telehealth on communication and interaction with this population.
It's done. I think that it's been an adjustment. I think, at least from my experience, has been. I think that it's definitely doable. It just takes some time of building a routine where they get comfortable with it and they get used to how to do it. The things that I've learned, and it's really been things that we learned about, like through some children's play therapy videos that I've listened to when we first went to the pandemic. But recognizing how do we set an environment like they're gonna that there's no distractions, because obviously when they come to my office, there was no distractions, but how do they create that? Because some families are better at that than others, or experiences. So that's probably the first thing that I worked with them on, and just kind of creating a routine in the session that they get used to certain things. I feel like just learning to engage them. I think, when I have seen people, there's been some people I was hearing them on the phone, but then when I would get to see them, it was like they lit up. So part of it is being able to be there. And I think it's just I feel like, the first few months for me, Zoom was everybody's staring at me, and that kind of thing. But eventually, you just kind of got used to it. And I feel like it's the same for them. I have had them, if they are more either younger, there's, it may be a little bit more challenging. But then I ask often if it is more of if they're easily distracted, that we make the set. Often I have my therapy sessions can be a half hour as opposed to a 45 minutes or an hour. But then it can be an hour because I'm spending that other time with the caregiver. So I'm often doing things with an intervention, but also then working with the, family, I'll just say in general, because I can't handle more than that, then that's fine. And really, again, I feel like it's the family that's going to make the changes. And that's that connection. And it's really just kind of that's why I also think being silly, having fun with them, teaching them to kind of get up and move around, even though, even if they don't move out of their chair, doing silly, I've learned that humor is a great way to connect. They realize, oh, you're okay, I like you. And they kind of get working with it. And it does take time, but it of course was easier to do in person, but it's definitely being done. And I'm, I've known other therapists who are also doing groups. And at first, it's kind of, it was interesting, but, they get used to it and they know, and they're actually being able to communicate. And that's really amazing. Anyone else? It has been a joy to be able to share some of these, what I've learned. Like I said, the plan is that this is going to be a series. Don't ask me what the next one is going to be about, because I have about 5 things different topics I could really focus on. But this is really, and has been an interest in mine for a long time, and it just continues to be developed. And I want to help. I would be, if you have what would be helpful as we're ending up right now is really if you have either a topic or an interest or a concern or a question that you think, hey, could this be a training? Hey, could you talk about this in another training? Or a topic that I did talk about but not a lot about. If you have hey, if you could get a little bit more about that, I would love it. Please put it in the chat, because this is I'm not predictable, and I am creative and flexible. So I can change my mind and say, oh, maybe the next one should be on this. But that's especially if I feel like, something that you present or an idea comes about that you could really use help with. I would love that. I'd love to be able to help that way. So if there's no more questions, make sure, I'm going to say it again, I said in the beginning, if you haven't put your name in the chat, please do so we can count you that you are part of this training. It's been my pleasure to be able to do this. And well, I'm just saying in general, I'm predicting that my next one will probably be in January, and we'll go from there and you'll learn about that as well.